Welcome back to another episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. And my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Tom Whitson, who's a former partner with KPMG Tokyo. Tom, welcome.
Thank you very much, Greg, for having me.
Well, Tom, you've been in Japan. How many years have you been here now? It's a long time.
Since 1984, actually.
84, okay. So, why Japan? How did you wind up in Japan?
Well, in 1968, when I graduated from high school, the Vietnam War was going, and I didn't have a really good way of staying out of the fighting, so I joined up to learn languages, and fortunately I was taught Korean rather than Vietnamese or Cambodian or Lao, and ended up being exposed to Korea for the first time. Then when I got out of the service safely, 3.5 years later, it was time for me to go to university. I had Korean. Japan was all the rage, so I decided to study Japanese at the University of Illinois.
Did you realize that the Korean grammatical structure and the Japanese grammatical structure are basically the same structure?
Not at the time, but it certainly made it a lot easier for me. And even more interesting, when I married a Korean lady with 2 Korean kids and brought them to Japan, I went from being the only Japanese speaker in the family to the worst Japanese speaker in the family in a period of like 3.5 months. It was really quite embarrassing.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting, the Korean structure, Japanese structure, same. So if you got the vocab, that's you don't have to worry about the structure. So yeah, but anyway.
Well, even the vocab, where it comes from Chinese roots, there's some connection.
Yeah.
So Chunhua and Denhua. Telephone.
And Dianhua in Chinese.
And yes,
Dianhua.
right, because it all came from Chinese.
Dianhua.
And actually, the weird thing is that when I find myself in Korea after a long time, the Korean takes a while to come back, but it sounds pretty good. It's reasonably fluent. But then if there's a vocabulary word that I don't remember in Korean, the Japanese word will drop in, and it flows really well, but there's this weird word that the Korean person doesn't understand.
Well, depending on their generation, right? If they're older generation, they are forced to learn Japanese, so they're probably okay with it.
There's fewer and fewer of those people available.
That's true. That's true.
But I have met some, and that's really, really interesting.
Anyway, we digress. So
yes, we
out
do.
of the forces, why Japan? You said that the Japanese economy was booming. So what year are we in now?
I was in university and studying Japanese, and actually I did a summer school in Korea from 72 to 74.
Okay.
And Japan was #1, according to Herman Kahn. But at the same time, when I looked at, what can I do with Japanese, the opportunities weren't really there. I felt that maybe a career in international business would make sense, but I couldn't guess what one would be. I found myself, though, at a very good university with a very good accounting program. So I majored in accounting, but also was interested in Korean and Japanese. So
right. Well, that would be too many accountants in the world who are thinking, right, now I'm just going to combine accounting with Korean or Japanese. That would be a population of 1, I would imagine, especially in those days.
I got a lot of attention.
I'm sure.
I got a lot of attention, and when I think back that this kind of career decision I made at age 22, I'm still on track.
Tracking nicely.
The track is getting rickety and narrower, maybe, but definitely this was the plan.
So did you work in the States in accounting?
Well, I interned at what later became KPMG when I was in university in 1974. I joined them in 1975 after graduation, and then they wanted me to bed down my accounting skills in the U.S., so they said, well, Los Angeles has a lot of Japanese companies that are coming into America, so we'd like you to work on that. And I moved to LA, and
So they knew you had a mindset that you wanted to come to Japan, I guess, and or Korea and work in accounting, and they were trying to set you up for that. Was that the plan?
oh, absolutely. That
Right.
was
That was very
the
clear.
deal. That was totally the deal. I
okay.
wasn't a generic accountant.
Right, okay.
You know,
I'm going to
at
be
all.
your guy in Nippon or something like that, yeah?
Well, I mean, there are other people that speak excellent Japanese, better than me, but in accounting, it's really quite rare.
It's rare, it is rare. And so you go to LA and you find...
I went to LA. I did all kinds of really interesting companies that were setting up in Japan, setting up from Japan, and looking at their problems, their issues. Two of my biggest clients were American Honda and Mazda Motors.
Wow.
And Mazda had this really, really interesting rotary engine, and but they were having some problems. American Honda, on the other hand, I really was fortunate because at that point they were changing from a motorcycle company to an automobile company. When I first started auditing them, their sales were more than half motorcycles. And then by the time I left LA for Korea, I was basically, they were more than half automobiles.
Wow.
And on their way to becoming a multi-billion-dollar company.
Right.
So that was really interesting to see. Very, very successful company.
So your first step is Korea with KPMG?
They found me. I wanted to go to Japan, but then they surprised me at the Christmas party, and they said, "Hey Tom, would you like to go to Korea for 3 months after busy season?" And I said, "Sure." My Japanese girlfriend at the time was not amused,
No.
but then you can delete that. But
Is she going to likely to be listening to this podcast?
No.
Then in that case,
But that's
don't worry about it.
no.
Okay, we'll cut that bit out. Okay.
No. So I started going to Korea, and that was kind of a gamble on their part. They wanted somebody who was a native speaker and familiar with U.S. GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, and to help clean up the reports that were coming out of Korea. And I hit it off really well with my boss and got along reasonably well with the rest of the staff. So they said, "Wow, we'd like you. We'd like you to come back again." And later they said, "Well, we know you want to go to Japan, but we want you to serve time in Korea first, because that was a higher need for them than Japan."
So is Tom a corporate player or not, is what they're asking the question.
I'm a loyal. I am a loyal corporate dweeb.
Good soldier.
Drone is
Good
it?
soldier.
Oh, soldier.
Sent
That's
where
it.
he's told
soldier.
to go. That's it.
I'm a good corporate
So how
soldier.
long did you spend in Korea then? That time?
Well, I did. It was about 3.5 years.
3.5 years, right?
Yeah,
And then how did you
79 to 83.
How did you get out of there and get back to Japan, or get to Japan?
Well, the first thing is when I got into Korea in 1979, the first thing that happened after I got there was they assassinated the president.
I know. I
And
remember
2 months after that, there
Park
was a
Chung-hee.
coup d'etat.
Park Chung-hee.
And
yeah.
the following May, they had a rebellion in Gwangju. So it was exciting times for a young guy.
Actually, I was in Korea at that time too. I was getting my my visa renewed
Every 3
And I had
months?
to go. In those days, you had to go outside Japan
Yeah.
to get it done. So I was in Seoul with the troops on the streets, with the tanks. But that was for an anniversary military parade. This was before the assassination.
Oh.
And then it was so militarized coming out of Australia. I was not used to it. Japan was not militarized. So I was like, wow, okay. And then bingo, I got back to Japan, and Park Chung-hee shot by his own soldiers in the military parade, right?
By his own chief of security.
Yeah, not bad.
Right. No, that was really exciting times and very, very fascinating, actually. But at the end of, I was still interested in Japan. So at the end of my tour in Korea, they sent me to the U.S. for a year of various kinds of training, and I had some experience then at a higher level doing audits of companies. So that was split between New York and California. I got to meet some important people in the organization that I had not met as a junior staff which is what I was when I went to Korea. And then moved into Japan. Tokyo is very well set up and ready to become a partner in the Japanese firm, which is what they needed by that time.
All right. So at this point, are you working as an individual inside a team with a boss, or have they given you a team to take care of?
Well, as a partner, you're responsible for a number of clients, maybe between 50 and 70 companies that you're responsible for the audits. And you assemble teams from the staff we have available, you know, managers, seniors, juniors, really juniors. And, you know, you do the work, the audit work that's necessary, meet the deadlines, resolve the issues, provide advice that is useful to the company and its overlords, wherever they are. And so, yeah, it was an interesting time.
So as a leader, you're working for 50, 70 clients. You've got teams together. You're putting teams together, and you're leading the team. Obviously, you're the client liaison, I guess.
Right.
So, what did you find challenging about leading in Japan that first time?
Well, I found it actually. Well, where I initially got some skills in doing this was that I was working almost at the same level in Korea with Koreans, and I was able to make lots of mistakes out of the notice of anybody because I was the only foreigner in Korea, and my boss was just happy that I took care of all the difficult foreigner clients. And so he didn't write me up and ruin my reputation in the organization. So when I got to Japan, I was a little better, but the Japanese are much more, it's a different kind of leadership. And I had to adjust to, I would say, the social norms of Japan are quite different than, well, other places that I've been. They're certainly much different than Korea, certainly different than America.
And when you say social norms, what are you thinking of there?
Well, the way things get done in groups and the importance of, I don't know, groupthink or behaving in a way that's acceptable to the group. Those kinds of things tend to be a lot more important here. Individualism is very much prized in places like Australia or the United States, and to some extent in Korea. But in Japan, it's actually there can be a downside to being too independent minded. You know, it makes people uncomfortable. It actually interferes with your ability to trust and inspire trust. So that's what I mean by the social norms. I would say one of the areas that I've relearned many times because it's not a lesson that I take on is that equating competence in English with competence in business.
Right.
That the tendency is that someone who is fluent and glib and can speak well in English actually can do the work. And I have learned this several times to my, I'm kind of embarrassed about, but the guy who actually was adding value to the organization was a quiet guy who just basically knew what to do and got everything done. And he behaved either in a Japanese way, a quiet Japanese way, and I didn't recognize it, or in some case I didn't reward it soon enough. And that's something I've regretted, but that's something where someone who comes to Japan and is leading a group needs to kind of withhold judgment for a while on people that don't speak English particularly well or may not be particularly articulate.
Well, the squeaky wheel gets the grease in every country, doesn't it? The people who are outgoing, confident, articulate, they tend to be regarded well, whether they deserve it or not. So I think probably in Japan it's probably magnified though, because it's a bit more under the radar here, isn't it?
I think I did some work on for a special engagement, and the number of people in Japan who have this outgoing, positive, energetic, maybe pushy or aggressive personality style is actually very much lower in Japan as a percentage of population than it is in the U.S. or Australia or especially like Israel, or some places like that where the culture brings out, and from a very early age, you're trained almost to be aggressive. This is how we succeed in our society.
Yep.
In Japan, yes, those people can succeed, but one of the things I noticed was that there were some Japanese with either intuitive skills or spent time in the U.S. or with foreign invested companies where they could turn it on and off. In English, they could behave like a New Yorker. But in Japanese, they switched to a much more collegial, consensus-oriented, soft but persistent, pushing gently as to get what they wanted.
But didn't you find that about yourself too? If I speak in English, I'm aggressive, forward, very push, push, push. But when I flip to Japanese, the tone goes down, the aggression gets cut off. It's like, I think, when you're working in the language itself, I think tends to get you into that sort of zone, don't you think?
There's an aspect to that. I think your Japanese is much better than mine, but definitely the Japanese ukemi,
yes,
passive voice construction, is part of the way communications are done in a gentle way. I've always been. I actually went through a writing course in my early professional career, which changed me in the way I communicate in English from lots of complex compound sentences to much more straightforward subject, verb, object, and don't use passive voice because we don't know who the actor is sometimes. And it confuses people. And I have found that, I listen as carefully as I can to Japanese, but sometimes the ukemi, the passive voice that is used, and the gentle way of going around the subject makes it difficult, actually, to really communicate. And I've actually been manipulated by my people in both Korea and Japan, where they say, all right, Tom, there's an issue which we can't bring up, but you're a foreigner, so you do it. And then we'll look surprised, but once it's out on the table, we can have a productive discussion and solve this problem. And I'll play along because it's kind of interesting. And it is really kind of fun, except that I'm being used. But it is an example of communication style and a willingness to try to accept and understand where other people are coming from. That's why one of the things I would recommend to anybody, no matter how long they're going to be here or what position they have, is that learning a little bit of Japanese, and as much as you have bandwidth for, is really, really useful. First of all, I mean, of course, the politenesses, the courtesies, the greetings, those are important. But when you study Japanese, you learn how Japanese formulate their thoughts and present their ideas. And they are different from straight English, in my experience. And by studying how they communicate, you can adjust your own way of communicating. And I've felt actually that has been a really useful lesson for me in revamping my way of talking in a business setting to Japanese, which really enhances communication. Actually, I had a client that you would call me up and he'd ask me a legal question. And I'd say, well, you realize that this is an accounting firm, it's not a law firm? He said, yeah, but Tom, you've been here a while, you know this stuff. And he'd ask me a question. Usually it was tax related or business law related. And I'd say, well, again, I'm not a lawyer here, but here's what I think are the issues and what's likely the case. I said, didn't you talk to your lawyer about it? He said, yeah. I said, so what did he say? He said, well, I think he said what you said, but I didn't understand him.
Yeah.
So that was actually, I was flattered by that because it meant that I was distilling and simplifying and presenting it in a way that he was able to take on board. That is really important to lead, because if people don't know what you want or where you're going, it's really hard for them to meet your expectations, actually, seriously.
Well, and also, I guess, you're working in a Japanese environment where you express your idea, explain what we're going to be doing, why it's important, and you think, all good, everyone understands. But invariably, weeks later, days later, you realize not understood. And you have to go and do it again, and maybe again. And I think this is something that I've found in a Japanese working environment. Never assume that what you've said has been understood. Now, there's a difference between I don't understand, because I don't really understand, and I don't understand because I don't agree. Because no one ever says, I don't agree with you. They just say, I don't understand. So there's that little bit of nuance too in terms of what are we talking about.
Oh, no, that's bigger than nuance, Greg. And that's one of my immediate lessons when I arrived in Japan. In Korea, my clients were mostly joint ventures between Korean and foreign companies. And in every case, there was this huge friction and difficulties between the foreign partner and the Korean partner because, the foreign guy would say, well, come over from the U.S. and he'd say, well, I'm from head office and I know what we're supposed to do here and we're going to do this and this and this. And Mr. Kim, the Bucho level guy would say, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard and it won't work here in Korea. And there would be immediate fighting. And fighting. My surprise when I got my clients in Japan was that many of these joint ventures had lasted for 30 or more years. Wow. And they were extraordinarily successful. And they still had guys come, fairly new guys coming in from overseas, but they worked better. And my thinking was that what I observed was that the new guy comes in from the States and he says, well, I'm the shacho, the president, and I know what I'm going to do here, and I've been assigned by the chairman to make this happen. And, so Tanaka, do you understand me? And Tanaka says, yes, I do. And, okay, and we're going to do it? And Tanaka says, yes, we will do it. And about 6 months into his assignment, the foreigner realizes, holy smokes, when I first got here, I told Tanaka to do something this way because that's the way we did it in the United States. But now that I've been here, I understand that the distribution system is different, the regulatory environment's different. There's all kinds of differences that make that actually not a very good plan. And I sure hope Tanaka didn't do it because we're in trouble. So the guy would go to Tanaka and say, "Hey, Tanaka-san, remember when I first got here and I told you to do this?" And Tanaka says, "Yes, I remember." And said, did you do it? And Tanaka says, "Well, we're still looking into exactly how we might do it." And then the guy is very relieved. He says, "Oh, okay, well, I tell you what, we don't have to do it that way." And everybody's face is saved.
Yeah.
The foreigner doesn't feel, that the Korean was in his face and abusing his authority. Tanaka prevents the company from doing something really stupid, and the joint venture lasts and is hugely successful in Japan. It's really great.
It's great. There's a very positive spin on we're not going to do what you ask us to do, boss.
Well,
because we think it's a stupid idea.
Reading, I have to say, reading Japanese and reading Koreans is really, really different. And that would be another piece of advice: is don't jump to conclusions about people or things because you won't. You needed to give it a lot more time.
You're in the business of solving problems for clients. And so I'm wondering, did you have any methodologies to brainstorm possible solutions with the team? Or in that accounting world, is it very much the partner is the guru and the partner is the brain and the partner tells you this is what's going to happen? Or did you have situations where collectively as a group, you'd be thinking about, well, okay, this is the problem for the client. What can we do from our side as a solution and get everyone involved? How does that work? Is it a very hierarchical top-down, or do you have these bottom-up types of opportunities as well?
Well, Japan is hierarchical generally, and accounting is very hierarchical. However, if I have an expertise, it's not in every subject. So what I found was most useful was to bring in people from outside, people that I might meet, a lawyer or a tax guy from my own office, but different floor, and then find out if there's people on my staff who have a particular experience or knowledge. One of the great things about the auditing, if there is anything good about auditing, is that you're at a new company. You see different ways of doing things or misdoing things. You see success, you see failure, and you still get paid. Your job is okay. And so you have a wonderful inside look at so many different companies, and you can synthesize that, and you want to try to get that experience that you can then use for a new client that comes in, because we don't know the answer to everything. But the more things we've seen, the easier it is for us to really do a good job of putting together a solution for a client in an area, almost any kind of area.
Often in companies, we get into a group think. You mentioned about group think earlier. You get into a mental rut and you start to think that the world is limited to a particular corridor where you can move. But often business, it's going outside that corridor and looking at it from a different angle, as you say, to find a solution which may not have been necessarily the first one that came into your mind. In terms of getting creativity out of people to approach problems from different angles, have you found anything particularly in your experience that worked well in Japan to do that?
Yeah, actually. This goes back to one of my earlier M&A assignments before I specialized in it. I did work with General Electric, and then I had a different project with Fujitsu. And the Fujitsu team was really smart. But it was all guys, a lot of Todai, Tokyo University graduates, all white shirts, dark ties, suits, and they were really smart, really smart. The GE team was different. It had a couple of Indian guys. It had a couple of Chinese women. The legal leader was an American black woman who was stationed in Singapore. There was an Irish guy on the team. It was a real mix.
Like corporate end type of United Nations there.
It really, the ferment and the stuff that went on and the creativity of that particular group compared with the Fujitsu team, who were cut from the same bolt of cloth, was a real eye-opener for me. So diversity is really, I think, one of the keys. And the element of diversity which I have found most useful personally to me is women, Japanese women, or almost any women, but Japanese women are the ones that I've worked with. When I set up the transaction practice at KPMG, my first hire was a really clever woman, and eventually, in very short time, it was growing very fast. So we were trying to get lots of people to work with us. At the manager level, just below partner, it was about 60% women and only 40% men, even though in our organization was probably 90% men and 10% women.
Oh,
but
that's interesting.
In a transaction environment, it's different than auditing. Most of the people have audit backgrounds, but auditors go in and they do a structured approach with lots of procedures to assess and determine that the historical financial records were okay. And they have as much time as they need, because until they're satisfied, the job's not done. With due diligence and M&A, there's always time pressure. You don't get all the information you want. If you get interviews, or when you get interviews with people, they are scared and unreliable, and they don't have to tell you the truth, because the deal either gets done or not get done. They get fired or whatever. It's a totally different dynamic. And what I found was Japanese women were far better at getting the truth and getting information in a non-threatening way from target company managements than a similar man, Japanese man, who would go in and say, well, I'm a CPA, I'm a Japanese CPA, and I'm smarter than you. They didn't say that, but there was an implication. The implication was there. And, that didn't help get the information that we needed to help our clients make decisions about buying or not buying, or adjusting the price, or requiring guarantees and that kind of thing. So that was a real good lesson, that diversity is really important to generating creativity. And that's a thing that carries through with one of my other projects, which is the Japan Market Expansion Competition. I've been involved with it for probably more than 20 years, and you're involved as well for a long time.
Long time.
But the JMEC people that join and work together and learn how to build the business plan are a very diverse group. We have 15 different countries, usually 15 to 20 different countries represented. We have about 50% women, 50% men. This is much different than it was 10 or 15 years ago. It was mostly foreigners and mostly men, but now it's much more women. And the creativity and engagement that these people have through the JMEC project that they work on together is really, really wonderful to see, because it proves to me that creativity, Japanese are not particularly haven't been particularly known for it, obviously known for it, but they actually are very creative. And if they're given a chance, if they're put in an environment where they are allowed to be, empowered to be creative, they do really, really wonderful work.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. One of the things I've always found, it's not never particularly amusing at the time, but you got your boss there, he's standing in front of the whiteboard, he's got the whiteboard marker and, looking for ideas and filleting ideas he doesn't like, tossing out ideas he doesn't like, and then expecting more ideas to come. So if you're sitting there watching one of your colleagues put up an idea and just see them having their idea torn to shreds, you sit there thinking, well, I think I'll just keep my mouth shut, and not say anything. And so one of the problems has always been, I think, for Japanese companies is how to create that psychologically safe environment that people feel free to put up ideas and be part of a creative process. And one of the things about that is that at the collection stage, there's no adjudication, no judgment of the idea. It's just collect as many as you can first, get all the possible ideas out, and then the second stage, start to think about, okay, what are some priorities here, what might be a better idea than another, and make some judgments. But most creative ideation sessions tend to be like the first one, where they're trying to do both at the same time. So in your experience, when you're doing it at a company-wide level or even section-wide level, how are you doing it? Were you filtering ideas as they came through? Were you trying to cast a broad net? What was working?
Well, I have to admit a personal failing that I tend to judge and mentally throw out ideas before everything's gotten up on the whiteboard. But I try to correct that. I try to hold that back in the interest of developing more input and more engagement from everybody concerned. Well,
often the crazy idea, like I'm like you, I'm sitting there listening to these ideas going, well, that sounds crazy. Well, that's never going to work. But often that spark from that irregular, offbeat, crazy, impractical idea triggers something in your own mind about how you could make it work or how you do it the other way around, that perhaps that idea would never have come up in your mind at all because the stimulation wasn't there. So that first harvest of a lot of ideas is a potential chance to stimulate better thinking. But if you don't get that stimulation, if the first harvest isn't there in quantity enough. So, yeah, please go on.
My sense is that the Japanese companies don't go through this almost formal idea fest approach where, okay, we're in the idea phase, let's get lots and lots of ideas, and then we'll work from there. I think the process in Japan is a little slower, actually, and there is an allowance for it, and I think that good senior managers are willing to listen to crazy stuff from their subordinates because they realize that after this junior staff gets this nutty idea off his chest, he's on the team and he will be a very good player, even if the team doesn't take up his idea. I recall visiting a factory, a Japanese factory at one point, and I was looking at some stuff along at the side of the assembly line where it was constructed out of steel and other stuff that they were making. And I said, so what's that? He said, well, some of the workers are working on their own on their own project and building something.
Skunk work.
It was, and this is actually, it's very hard. I really like to see that because that's in line with what I understand Japanese creativity to be about, which is more intrapreneurship rather than entrepreneurship. In the U.S., you've got the R&D guys with their brilliant minds and developing the product and stuff like that, and then the super industrial engineers who say, okay, this is how we're going to make it. But in Japan, there's a lot more engagement from the rank and file, I think, like I saw in this factory, so that when the idea was actually implemented, if it was production, the regular guy on the line actually knew how to do it. And he was involved because he was involved in setting it up. So if it had to be explained to other workers, he had much more credibility than this guy with a white shirt. Whereas in the United States, it seems to be it's R&D, it's passed off to the plant engineers, and then it's forced on the union. And that leads to friction and not always a good result. Whereas what I think I've seen in Japanese factories is that the workers really know their stuff. When I've toured Japanese factories and the guy that's taken me on the tour says, well, explain what you're doing. This guy goes into a long explanation, detailed explanation, excellent, outline of what he's up to. The same thing in many American factories that I've also audited is that nobody would ask the guy, and he may be an illegal alien and not speak English. And so the process is really different. And I think, and I do definitely, as you can tell, I admire the Japanese approach. And managing it so that you don't kill it is a thing that new leaders to Japan really need to remember.
I did a tour of a Mitsubishi car factory when I was consul general in Osaka or consul in Nagoya, I can't remember, but I don't remember why I was invited to this factory tour. I went to this factory tour and they've got the assembly line. And one of the shells, the bodies, is on the assembly line. And on a piece of A4, they just had with sticky tape, adhesive tape, they just taped, and it said Chugoku, China. So I asked the person giving me the tour of the factory head, I said, what's going on here? He said, that's to let everybody know this is one of our first cars which we're exporting into the Chinese market.
Okay.
Do a especially good job.
Do a good job on it, yeah.
And I thought to myself, wow, how simple to be able to just put that on there and then have the workers respond to that signal and do a really good job to penetrate a new market for the company. I thought, wow, a lot of things have got to be going on here to make all that work. That was impressive. And that's, I thought, was very creative, very simple, very creative. In terms of building trust with teams, one of the things in Japan, when you don't know Japan, you think, the Japanese are not emotional. It's all very, wooden faces, businesslike. But when you get here, you realise how emotional everyone is. And you particularly realise that trust is purely emotion. And you'll be interviewing people for jobs and they'll change jobs. And you say, why'd you, my previous boss asked me to come and work. And so because they had that trust between them, quit this company and went and joined another company. Then that company fails, goes broke or gets taken over, and then they're out of work, and then they've got to go and find another job somewhere. The trust, the human trust is sort of overriding logic in a lot of ways. I always thought in some cases in terms of their job progression. But anyway, and then you realise that actually, trust in doing business, if the trust is not there, nothing works. And that trust is often based on emotion. how people think about you. It's not logical, how they feel about you and your passion, your enthusiasm. So what was your experience with getting trust amongst your teams?
Right. I think it's for foreigners, particularly people that come from Australia or the United States, we tend to talk a lot. Mm-hmm. And I think listening is really, first of all, listening to someone shows respect. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to trust somebody who doesn't respect you. Mm-hmm. So that, I would say, is pretty important. The listening, the respect. I think accessibility. You need to be accessible. You need to not make quick judgments about things. And then to the extent that you can try to help people in areas that they maybe are ashamed to ask for. Mm-hmm. But if you step out of your area to help somebody do something, that is actually an element that indicates that you're trying to help them, and that you're there for them. That's a better way of saying showing it than talking about it.
Yep.
But I would say it's a longer process than it might be in some other places, I suppose. But again, as you pointed out, the strength of it afterwards is quite amazing sometimes. That some funny situations arise from this trust kind of a thing. I trust you'll look after me. Yeah, I definitely would like to. I think I scored points with my people because any foreign calls that started after 10 o'clock at night or before 7 o'clock in the morning, those were my calls. I wanted to get briefed from my team to make sure that I understood what was on the call. But I said, look, your English is, you guys are working crazy hours. Your English is pretty good during the day, but at 2 o'clock in the morning, your English isn't really that good, and you need some sleep because you've got another hard day because we've got a deadline. And so I, on the other hand, this is my language, English is my language. If you prepare me, I think you should sleep, and I'll do this call. That was one of the things that I tried to do. If someone called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, I tried to schedule it at 3 o'clock the next day for the follow-up call in their time zone.
Yeah.
just to give
Payback.
them, well, yeah, and just to give them a sense that the world is round and has a lot of time zones.
Yeah, that's, I think, particularly difficult for Americans in many cases. Our headquarters is in the US. Dale Carnegie, we're a global organisation. You're always struggling to find the time. So anyway, in terms of in your team, you talk about listening as one of the things that build trust. What other things did you find work well in terms of building trust with teams?
Well, you show trust by giving them challenging assignments, and then first trying to make sure they have what they need to accomplish it successfully, but then letting them go with it. And, and kind of saying, well, look, I'm not going to, I did this when I was in your level, but you can do this. I'll review it, of course, and if you've got any questions, ask me, but it's your baby, go with it. One of the things about an audit firm is that you don't have 5 people doing the same thing on a particular engagement. If there are 5 people involved in doing the work, each of them is doing something different, and they're responsible for that. Now, there's a hierarchy that they have someone who's kind of mentoring them or teaching them or reviewing them, and then there's another review and another, and I'm maybe at the top review, but that binds things together because you're doing something, you're doing it. You're alone actually doing it. But you're not exactly alone because you've got more experienced people who are available if it gets sticky. And that works. That works as well. I think to do it. There's a lot of empowerment.
What about mistakes? For example, we talked about creativity before. If you're trying something new, you get people to step out of their comfort zone. There's bound to be mistakes. Mistakes happen naturally anyway. You miss something. You might be tired, as you said. How do you handle mistakes?
Well, if it's my project and I'm the partner responsible, it's my problem. And it's probably because my people weren't adequately either briefed on what were the issues or supervised while they were doing whatever turned out to be a mistake, or the review process missed something. So in any case, the buck stops with the boss. And again, I think that's an element that, people is an element of trust. I trust you to do the right thing, but I do know that you don't have as much experience about this, or that somebody in the other side lied to you. Okay, well, let's get the facts. And my approach in that is, let's fix the problem, not the blame. That's kind of a trite phrase, but it's actually true. And the faster you get in the problem-fixing area, to contain the problem, to find out how it occurred quickly, and then how to get out of it or how to make the best of it, that's positive. That is positive, and that's where you need to go. Going back and blaming people is pretty unproductive, and really is actually a kind of a bad lesson, because you do want people to come up with questions before it's too late.
Yes.
Oh, well, I was afraid, you'd yell at me. Well, yeah, but I would apologize pretty quickly afterwards. Yes, I might yell, but I'd apologize quickly. And so I actually have no problem with apologies. I've made lots of apologies. And to the Japanese government as well. I've got Gomen Nasai letters stacked up about this high somewhere in the archives of Narita is mostly where I have to apologize, or the immigration office and government offices.
I've got the odd letter there myself, I have to confess. But, what I found interesting when I was at Shinsei Bank, like your industry, it's very highly regulated. There are lots of particular procedures, compliance procedures must be followed. And the problems would come up when people would make a mistake, okay, but then they'd try and hide the mistake.
Oh, yeah.
And so, they're trying to suppress it, but they can't suppress it because at some point the system unearths it. And rather than go and say, hey, listen, I've made a mistake here, and getting whatever would be minor punishment, if any, or, they hide it. And then next thing you know, the thing has grown into enormous proportions. It's too late. And so they lose their job, basically, because they've made a severe
Well, they
compliance.
can destroy the company.
Yeah, exactly. A major compliance violation, and now they're out. So, this ability to, as you say, demonstrate to other people that, yes, mistakes happen. I'm here to help you fix a mistake and make sure it doesn't happen again. We're not here to, brutalize you. We're here to fix errors, and we're trying to reduce mistakes. And so that seems like a very normal procedure. But when I'm training with Japanese companies and we're talking about handling mistakes, and we have a procedure in Dale Carnegie of how you handle mistakes, you often hear these stories. My boss stood up in the office and screamed at me and told me I was an idiot. Another one said, my boss threw an ashtray in my head, back in the days when there were ashtrays in offices. So you see that the Japanese system, there's not necessarily the same way of handling mistakes as perhaps in the Western system. So I think it's probably getting better.
I think throwing things and tearing things up and yelling and so forth are pretty common across the world.
Across the world? Mm.
Yeah. Now, I don't think good managers achieve the right results by using that. I think there are cases where, venting can be cathartic and healthy for whoever's, ultimately going to take the rap for it, is a chance to yell at a subordinate for really ruining my weekend or my life by something they did. But I do agree with you that usually the initial mistake is easily fixable or not that costly, requires an apology. Yes, it's embarrassing. Yes, but it's not financially fatal or career fatal. But covering up, that is something that's really, really bad in almost any circumstance that I can think of. And that's where people, politicians especially, get into really, really deep water. And we've seen it, a lot. The Olympus, a lot of financial scandals come up when someone is doing something a little tricky to meet some sort of short-term goal. And then next quarter they have to do something a little more because things still aren't working out and they're not able to recoup. And then it gets out of control and the numbers can become immense. And at that point, then it's really, really bad. So we try to identify things. We try actually not to try to get a read on a person as to what is their likelihood, how honest, how comfortable are they, how strong is their personality that it could accept getting a small slap on the wrist for a small mistake? Or are they so insecure that they will go and go to the mat to protect something that could have been easily explained once upon a time, but now is actually almost an existential risk to the company. Obviously, as an auditor, I've seen that stuff.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. I've always thought, and I hope, I probably don't communicate this as often as I should, but try to tell people, look, we all make mistakes. But I have the money, I have the authority, and I have the power to fix mistakes if I have the time. Time in the sense of if I know. If there's right at the very end of the time limit, you tell me, we're out of time, I can't help you. I have the authority, money, power, but I can't help you. But if I know earlier, then I can help you. So don't hide it. Tell me early. The earlier you tell me, the easier it is for me to help you fix it. Help you fix it. And I think that's something that, again, it comes back to psychologically safe environment. Let's talk a little bit about culture. What sort of culture did you try and build in the organizations when you were there?
Well, I suppose there's some examples, but that I might have shown of a foreigner working in a Japanese organization. But honestly, I basically tried to do my best to understand the Japanese culture and then to work within it. And then areas where my background and experience could actually help people or help the organization deal with certain clients or certain types of situations or certain projects, then I would step up and do what I could. I don't really call, I wouldn't try to change the culture. I wasn't in that kind of a leadership role where I was a cultural change agent, but I could do things by example. And that was actually pretty useful because when I was asked to set up this M&A transaction group, recruiting people was not so difficult because there were certain people that I had worked with that, found they maybe enjoyed working.
But emotional connection there, right?
And, they left the safe and sane, staid audit world to work on M&A and, uncertain situations. And that might be an example of offering a different culture that was attractive to certain people, which mostly the people that I recruited were women. Because they could do it, and they, appreciated what I, the way I led them was acceptable to them. So,
well, I guess, culture is a broad term, but it's really, it comes back to those things about engagement, about trust, about communication, listening, all those sorts of things, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, in our company, we say very clearly, and I say, we do a morning get-together. We do it online these days. We call it the daily chore,
right?
The typical Japanese chore. And we go through vision, mission, values. We go through a whole bunch of things.
Do you do radio Taiso at the same time?
No,
I mean,
we're not doing
that would really get everybody's blood working.
It's funny though. We have
radio exercise in the morning.
Well, it's funny you should say that because we go through the vision, mission, values, and when we say we exceed, for example, one of our areas of the mission, by providing customized business solutions based on the Dale Carnegie principles, and we all do it. We all raise our arms, exceed our customers' expectations, clients' expectations, Or we're going to 10x, and we all do the 10x, we're going to 10x our thoughts and actions, or we're going to be in our business at our size, we must have a strong sense of urgency. We have to be the speedboat. We cannot be the oil tanker. So we're all doing all these weird actions, physical actions.
Well, that is, okay, so
that's a bit
good.
like that, but it's not Radio Taiso in that sense. But these things came out naturally. It was never designed like that. Well, we're going to raise our hand here, we're going to do a 10x here, we're going to do a speedboat here. People just started doing it.
Oh, you mean in other countries, Dale Carnegie?
No, we do that. This is us.
This is Japan.
Our office, yeah.
Oh, okay,
this is how we do it.
So it is influenced by NHK.
It's not a global thing, or maybe it could be NHK. But part of that is we talk about our three priorities. Priority number one is your health. Priority number two is your family's health, and priority number three is company health. So we say, our health, our family's health, our company health, and we say that every day, and that creates a different type of culture. So the emphasis is not on how do we squeeze, the most out of people for the maximum profit and throw people away when we've used them. This, again, culture. It's these sorts of things like how you have your vision, mission, values, how you have these sorts of things inside the company to build a mindset about how we think about people, how we treat people. So I'm just wondering, I've never worked in accounting, but I'm just wondering, do you have similar things there and how you build that sort of culture about how people are valued?
I have to say that we don't approach it, or we didn't approach it the same way. And I would have to say that there was a lot of talk about work-life balance.
Good.
But the fact is that during the busy season, since, 90% of Japanese public companies have their year end at March 31st, we're going nuts as a firm in April and May.
Yep.
And working all crazy hours is something that it's something I did as a junior. All night at the computer center, getting pizza stains all over the printouts that I needed to audit the inventory at some company. This was, part of the fraternity hazing kind of situation. So we all did it. It was crazy. It was probably not particularly healthy, but we were all young at that time. I've consciously tried to be a little more, as I got older, tried to be a little bit more, sensitive about that because, frankly, it's selfishly, if the person is working 16 hours a day, the last 6 hours are pretty unproductive.
Yeah.
And the stuff needs to be fixed. And that's where the mistakes happen is in the last 2 hours. It's like skiing.
Yep.
The last run of the day is when you
Do the
fall over, you're tired, you lose concentration, and that's when you plant your face in a tree.
Yeah.
And that's not good. So again, I can't claim any altruistic motives. It was really pretty self-serving in that regard. Actually, another example of concern about people and health and so forth. I'm the statutory auditor for a securities company, and during COVID, we went to a remote operation. Since much of our stuff is IT, we found actually that without having to go back and forth to work, people could work on their computers from home and not have to travel so many hours a day, and that productivity actually went up. And so I was looking at COVID and thinking, oh, that's okay. And then I found out fairly recently that we had one of our staff got COVID. Now, they weren't coming to the office. We reported it in. They had the follow-up, the contact tracing and stuff. They weren't shedding viruses when they were in the office. So there was no risk of the office people. But that started thinking about, okay, COVID is pretty serious. We have a small organization. Almost everybody is really could be considered mission critical. Right. So if they do get sick, especially a serious sick, we've got a corporate sustainability risk, and we've got a business continuity risk because of these people. And therefore, the follow-on to that was, what's the vaccination status of our people? And so we asked the HR person to find out. And she reported that all but 3 people had gotten vaccinated. 2 of the 3 were willing to get vaccinated as soon as they could, because Japan was in the process of rolling out rather slower than some other places. And 1 person was hesitant. And I was really quite concerned about hesitant, especially when I was reading reports about companies in the U.S. who basically were having, okay, there's a vaccine mandate. You have a vaccine, you're vaccinated, or you don't come to work.
Or you're toast, yeah.
Yeah, you're toast, basically. And I knew we couldn't do that here, but I wanted to see what we could do within the rules in Japan to encourage vaccination. So I had done some initiatives on my own, so I reported to the boss about the American Club vaccination program, which I think was just a wonderful deal.
Yeah.
56,000 shots.
I know, it was incredible.
Which was really a big deal. One of the most productive shot places in all of Minato-ku.
Well, my wife and my son both got their shots there.
Well, I went to a different place, which turned out one of only 10 in Minato-ku at the start. And I said, all right. They said, well, you come back in 3 weeks. I said, well, in 3 weeks, I've got something planned. Can I come back 2 days later? Well, no, we're not open. I said, when are you open? Oh, Sundays and Wednesdays. I'm thinking, are we serious about vaccinating the Japanese population?
Really?
I was shocked.
Yeah.
But the American Club was open pretty much
7 days a week.
7
days a week.
And I don't know why the American Club could be open that much, and the vaccination centers set up by the city fathers weren't.
We'll leave that as one of the mysteries of life in Japan.
Yeah.
Let's talk about advice for people who are going to be sent to Japan. You've been here, since 84, I think it was, you said, 84?
Yeah.
Long time. You've worked here all of your career, basically, if you think about it. Just about all of your career has been here. So you know Japan extremely well. You can give good advice.
No, the first 9 years of my career were outside Japan.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But,
those were important. And those, the beginning of your career are pretty important. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know enough about life here, work here, to give good advice. What would be a couple of pieces of advice for someone who's going to be sent to Japan? It's going to be maybe 3 to 5 years. How do they make it work?
Well, I would say, again, cultural sensitivity is really critical to a success. And I believe that leaders have to have goals, and they have to communicate those goals to the people that are led. To do that in Japan, I think you have to learn about Japanese society and how it works. And not just from one source. You need to learn from various sources, because just myself, I'm not necessarily a person who can explain what's going on in the United States very effectively. Certainly not anymore. What's going on there. And maybe you're not the best guy to explain Australia to people who have never been there. Yeah. But you need to get various sources to explain to you about how Japanese society works and synthesize some understanding and test it out and so forth. The second thing I think, again, I mentioned this before, is learn some Japanese. It's really, really critical. There's the courtesies and the politenesses and the greetings and so forth, which make people feel that you're trying to meet them halfway. But more importantly is, as you study Japanese, you get some insight into the way Japanese think, the way they present ideas, and the way they avoid certain things. And that allows you to listen smarter, and you can hear things. So, for instance, the famous Nakasone Reagan thing that developed into a problem where Reagan said, well, can you fix the automobile export issue? And Nakasone said, well, I'll look into it. Well, after a while in Japan, you know that I'll look into that means no way. It ain't going to happen. Whereas in English, just the straight translation is, oh, okay, well, great. He's working on it. He's the top guy.
He's working on it.
He should be able to accomplish something.
Fix that problem,
and that I'll be happy with that.
Yeah.
But that's where you pick up cues from Japanese. Even if you're not understanding exactly what they're saying, you can get information from them. And maybe more importantly is how you then are able to reformat how you talk to people. And to the extent that you can simplify or straighten out some of your sentence structures or ways of communicating, you can be much more effective at getting your message over to people. And that's, I think, really important. And then taking time. Take more time, especially at the beginning, with Japanese colleagues. Get them comfortable with the issues. Don't press things too fast. The Japanese often take a lot of time to internalize things. And they think pretty deeply about stuff before they're actually ready to either comment or act. And this is quite different than very fast twitch Americans, I'll call it. Fast twitch muscles, fast twitch Americans who want to,
we'll fix it after.
We'll do it, and then we'll fix it later.
We'll fix it later, yeah.
Actually, this different sense of time and willingness to allow gaps in time I heard a really great story from one of my clients, a Japanese guy who was working with medical diagnostic. Anyway, some kind of expensive piece of equipment that he was representing for a foreign company. And he said that early on in his career, he had this really wonderful experience. He was going to buy, it was a printing press or some huge piece of machinery from an American company. And the American was there, and the American, said, "Okay, so we can deliver here, and we can let you have it for $500,000." And this guy told me, he says, I thought that was perfectly okay. And while I was thinking about how I was going to answer him and accept his offer, I guess I took too much time to answer. The salesman got nervous, and he said, "Well, how about $400,000?"
Whoa!
So
not bad.
So this guy said,
"Not bad.
I never respond quickly
with Americans ever again."
But no, that was quite funny, and I was really pleased. But I'd seen that kind of thing where anxious, the people, filling up empty space. Not an issue. The Japanese seem to be relatively more comfortable with dead space, dead time, dead silence. Whereas some foreigners want to fill it up, and that creates some differences in outcomes for sure.
Absolutely.
In one case, at least $100,000.
Yeah, there's 20% there, right there. Not bad. So
Well,
if you're going to give a definition of leadership, Tom, what would you say?
Well, somebody said leadership is finding out where the mob's going and then rushing around to get in front of it. But I think leadership is basically setting goals for the organization, setting a general way of getting there, and then communicating with the people in the organization so that they can contribute in the best way possible to achieve the goals of the organization. I see that as really a great example of leadership.
Great. Well, Tom, thank you. Been great exploring your experiences in Japan. It's been very valuable. Thank you for your insights.
Not at all.
And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.